What was the real reason for CIA Director John Ratcliffe's recent visit to Moscow to meet with, well, we're not sure who yet. But we're going to be talking about that today on this edition of the No Delusion Zone for Thursday, August 27th, 2026. Hi, I'm David Debato. You know, when I heard about this unexpected visit by Ratcliffe to Moscow on a C-17 U.S. military heavy transport plane landing in Moscow, and then watching Peskov's ridiculous statement that he knew nothing about it, that it all came as a surprise, it got me thinking about an article I wrote about a similar meeting between the U.S. CIA director and, well, in this case, it seemed to be Putin and some of the senior intelligence officials way back in November of 2021, just before the full-scale invasion of Russia by Ukraine. I wrote a fairly lengthy piece about that about 3 years ago, actually, when a story broke in Newsweek magazine by what I consider a very respected journalist, William Arkin. William Arkin has been on the scene for a very long time, and he specializes in writing about issues of national intelligence and national security, and U.S. intelligence agencies. He's written some really good pieces, and he's got a lot of very good contacts. In any event, he wrote an article back in, I believe it was July of 2023, talking about that meeting by then CIA Director William Burns, who flew to Moscow to meet with, and at that time it said with Putin. And I am going to, I'm going to put up the article that I wrote just after that Newsweek article broke. And I just want to say this. Look, after this unexpected and earth-shattering bombshell of a meeting between the CIA director and unknown high-level officials in Moscow, just about every pundit, every analyst, and every elected official who made any statements about this at all said that most likely the reason for Ratcliffe's visit was to warn Russia not to invade NATO, not to increase their provocation, not to increase their hybrid warfare into NATO nations, to give them a good stern finger wagging. Don't do it. I'm not sure, but I will say this. I tend to agree that might have been the reason for Ratcliffe's visit. But I'm also going to say something else, which I don't think should be dismissed out of hand. And it's something that no one, to my knowledge, has said so far about Ratcliffe's visit to Moscow. But I'm going to say it because it needs to be said. I believe that there's a fairly good chance that what Ratcliffe was doing in Moscow was the same thing that Burns did in Moscow. Going on, now 5 years ago. He was there in November of 2021. And so I'm going to get into that right now. I'm going to post the reprints of the article that I wrote in 2023 and repost it in 2025. And this is on my Substack, protectingtherepublic.com. I highly recommend you go there. It's protectingtherepublic.com. And this is the title of the reprint of my 2023 article. And it's titled The Betrayal of Ukraine by the U.S. And as I said, it's a repost from December of 2023 with the subtitle, First the CIA, Now Biden. And I'm going to just read excerpts from the beginning of that post. In November of 2021, just weeks before Russian armed columns raced south towards Kyiv from Belarus, American CIA Director William Burns, former U.S. ambassador to Russia, spoke with Vladimir Putin via secure telephone and senior Russian officials at the Kremlin. The only topic on the agenda was the looming Russian invasion into Ukraine. Burns knew full well that the Kremlin talk about the Russian military merely staging pre-planned exercises on the Ukrainian border was 100% unadulterated BS. The only challenge for Burns was making sure that both the Kremlin and the White House knew the rules for the upcoming invasion and then abided by those rules, just as they had all during the Cold War, a period for which Burns was very familiar. There were no real efforts by Burns of talking Putin out of the invasion. No mention of the 1994 Budapest Agreement guaranteeing Ukraine's territorial integrity and ratified by Russia. And there were no real threats of retaliation by America or NATO. The only goal of the visit by Burns to Moscow was to establish Cold War-like rules of the Great Game that both Russia and the U.S. would follow during the illegal invasion of a sovereign European nation by Russia. And I'm going to continue on. And this is now going to quote the piece from Newsweek that I was talking about. And this is an article that came out on July 5th of 2023 by William Arkin, as I mentioned, a well-regarded journalist in the areas of national security and U.S. intelligence agencies. And it begins, this is an excerpt from Newsweek regarding the covert CIA meeting in Moscow. In some ironic ways, though, the meeting was highly successful, says the second senior intelligence official who was briefed on it. Even though Russia invaded, the two countries were able to accept tried and true rules of the road. The United States would not fight directly nor seek regime change, the Biden administration pledged. Russia would limit its assault to Ukraine and act in accordance with unstated but well-understood guidelines for secret operations. There were clandestine rules of the road, said the senior defense intelligence official, even if they are not codified on paper, particularly one isn't engaged in a war of annihilation. This includes staying within day-to-day boundaries of spying, not crossing certain borders, and not attacking each other's leadership or diplomats. Generally, the Russians have respected those global red lines, even if those lines are invisible, the official says. I cannot adequately express my rage at knowing that my government, through the CIA, set the rules and gave tacit permission for Russia's genocidal invasion of Ukraine, and then sat back and watched the results. If that does not make you angry as well, then you're probably a Kremlin supporter or someone for whom the Russia-Ukraine war is merely a distraction from your day-to-day life. As for me, I am livid at this development, an action I have actually written about previously and one that has greatly altered my view about Western support for Ukraine, as well as their cowardly relations with Russia. And if that wasn't enough, I'm going to read now an excerpt from an article in the New York Times that was published just after this meeting. This was published in November of 2021. And I believe that Burns met with Putin on November 5th of 2021. And here's, again, an excerpt from the New York Times piece. William J. Burns, the CIA director, met with a top advisor to President Vladimir V. Putin in Moscow on Tuesday, leading a delegation of American officials on a two-day visit to the Russian capital that served as the latest evidence of heightened engagement between two global adversaries. Mr. Burns was traveling at President Biden's request, the American embassy in Moscow said in a statement. The surprise visit was something of a merger of Mr. Burns' current role as intelligence chief and his past jobs as a senior American diplomat and State Department official. Karen Donfried, the Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, joined Mr. Burns in his meeting with the advisor to Mr. Putin, Nikolai Patrushev. They are meeting with members of the Russian government to discuss a range of issues in the bilateral relationship, an embassy spokesman said of the American delegation's visit scheduled for Tuesday and Wednesday. As much as I admire the New York Times, and I quote from them frequently, that was a bunch of BS. As they frequently do, they glossed over the matter. They didn't dig deeply. They apparently didn't have very good sources, and they pretty much just put out a press release from the White House and the CIA and most likely the Pentagon. Just nonsense. They didn't talk about what really probably happened there, which William Arkin did with his very well-placed deep sources within the intelligence and defense department communities. The whole point, apparently, again, according to William Arkin, and deeply sourced by many different officials within the CIA and defense departments, said that the sole purpose of CIA Director Burns' mission was to basically set out the rules of the game. That if Russia didn't push too far into Ukraine, the United States and NATO wouldn't really do anything about it. They would just let him have it. And depending on how fast they moved into Ukraine, probably let Putin divvy up Ukraine as he saw fit, which was his original plan, to invade and attack Kyiv and overthrow the Ukrainian government within a matter of days or perhaps weeks, and then continue the advance, the onslaught west into the rest of Ukraine, subjugate the country, and bring it back into the to the Russian Empire or Soviet Union 2.0 or whatever his mad dreams called for. So basically, the great game was afoot again, and the United States said, "Okay, let's continue following the rules of the Cold War. If you do what we say and follow those rules, you get a green light from us." And as I stated in my reading of the excerpt that I wrote of that incident in my article on Substack, it really pissed me off, made me nauseous. I can't say enough negative things about that. And I'm bringing this up again for obvious reasons. We now have the current CIA director, John Ratcliffe, who just returned from a brief visit to Moscow, where everyone denied he met with Putin. I think that's also nonsense. That he met with senior Russian intelligence officials, the head of the SVR, their Foreign Intelligence Service. I don't doubt he did meet with him, but I'm sure he met with Putin as well. If not, Putin was listening in. But in any event, in my opinion, based on past performances of the United States, certainly under Trump and yes, under Biden, and the past two CIA administrations, I think there's a better than fair chance that the sole purpose of Ratcliffe's mission to Moscow was to do a very similar thing, to pull a very similar tactic as his predecessor, Burns, did in 2021, which was to lay out the rules of the great game. Yes, I think he may have also warned Putin very sternly about invading a NATO country. But I also think he gave him at least a partially green light to do what he wanted to do for the rest of the war in Ukraine, stating that the United States would no longer supply Ukraine with Patriot missiles or anything really that they needed to defend themselves, much less defeat Russia. I think it was a very similar meeting to what had happened 5 years prior. And again, I've heard this nowhere, not because it's crazy. You may think I'm crazy. Go for it. I don't think it's crazy at all, because this happened before, and I don't trust a word that comes out of this administration, the Trump administration, whether it's by him, by Ratcliffe, by Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, or any of those cult member sycophants. I don't believe any of them. And I do believe that they are all in the pocket of Russia, that they do as Russia wants, not as our Western allies want. It's disgusting. So again, I'm saying that, yeah, I'm going to go against what all the Western analysts, pundits, and journalists and elected officials have said, that the sole purpose of Ratcliffe's visit to Moscow was to warn Putin against invading NATO. I think that was probably something that did happen. He did warn him about that. But I also believe it was, meeting 2.0, a follow-up to Burns' meeting with Putin 5 years ago, saying that if Putin continued the war, he pretty much would get a green light to do as he saw fit in Ukraine. And the United States, especially the United States, but probably NATO as well, would do nothing to stop him. Although at this point, I don't think that America really calls the shots for NATO. So I'll say that. But I'm pretty sure that he said that the United States would not stop him, would not lift a finger to aid Ukraine if Putin wanted to increase his barbaric warfare into Ukraine. Let me know what you think. I'm sure many people will disagree, and that's fine. I have heard no one at any level talk about this point that I'm talking about, even though it happened 5 years ago. But in a way, I'm not surprised because we have no media here in the United States. They're all bought and sold by the Trump administration. And when the William Arkin piece came out in Newsweek several years ago about this was a bombshell. It got practically no press at all, even though it was deeply sourced. Disgusted me then, disgusts me now, and it disgusts me that nothing is even being mentioned about this possibility now after the Ratcliffe visit. And that's all for today's edition of the No Delusion Zone. As always, please click the like and then subscribe to the No Delusion Zone. Need all the support I can get. Tell your friends, relatives, co-workers, and so forth to also watch, like, and subscribe to the No Delusion Zone. And until next time, you all take care, stay safe, and stay sane.